would also like to thank you for listening to Community Radio on WGRN LP 94.1 FM, Columbus. I'd like to welcome back our listeners. This is Felicia, your host. We have with us today Habiba Bankston, who is a sickle cell warrior, but also a survivor of this chronic blood disorder known as sickle cell disease. She is here to share her journey on how she has dealt with living with sickle cell disease and some of her coping skills that she developed to help her through each phase of her life. Hi, Habiba.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
No problem. Miss Annie Womack, we also have her as one of our hosts today. Hi, Annie.
Hi, how's everybody doing today?
And then, of course, I have my brother back there somewhere. Where are you at, Ernie?
Hello, everybody. Hope you're staying safe.
Yeah, I agree with that. I hope everybody is staying safe.
Habiba, when did you first learn that you had sickle cell disease?
Well, in regard to my sickle cell, I was diagnosed at birth just a few days after my parents brought me home from the hospital when I was born. My mom shared with me that she got a phone call from her doctor just a few days after bringing me home, and they informed both her and my father that I had sickle cell.
So when they informed you, how did your parents share that with you as you were growing up?
That's a great question. Growing up, my parents were very honest with me about the fact that, this is something that I have, and also some of the challenges that it might present for me growing up. I always had, they were much more careful when it came to me just being mindful of, what type of physical activity I did because of the strain it could potentially put on my body, or just little things. Like they always made it clear that, there are certain things that I can't necessarily do because of how it would affect me. And of course, as a young child, it's hard to hear those things, or hard to hear, why your siblings or your cousins or your close friends, can jump in a swimming pool or be in the swimming pool all day, or run around outside in the sun all day, or even be outside when it's cold. And I couldn't necessarily do that because of how it would affect my body. So that was challenging growing up. But it's definitely something that I've learned to get used to. I think early on in my younger years, it made me incredibly sad, sometimes resentful, but I've learned to cope and grow with it. I
was just curious as to whether or not any of her siblings were diagnosed with sickle cell.
So none of my siblings have it. There's 3 of us total. I am the only one who has sickle cell disease. Both my parents and also my siblings have sickle cell trait. I was the lucky one who got the disease, and I have type SS. So that also presented some challenges. Go ahead.
Are you the youngest or the middle child or the oldest?
I'm definitely the middle child, and being the only one within my family that had the disease also presented some challenges, just because, in the moments when I'm having a pain crisis or I'm not feeling well, my family has always been incredibly supportive, and they all collectively learned what it meant to take good care of me. But there was always still a gap there in understanding how I truly felt. And I feel like that's how it is with most sickle cell patients. There is an unspoken sense of understanding when you're with someone else who has it, because you really can't describe what it's like to live with it. So that was interesting growing up, but my family has always been incredibly supportive, and they made an effort to really educate themselves. That's one thing I'm so grateful to my parents for. Primarily my mother, because no matter what was going on with me, she didn't necessarily try to shield siblings away from what was happening with me. She always explained to them, what I was dealing with, how I was feeling, why I have to, be at the hospital and I'm not coming home, or why I have to miss school sometimes because I'm not feeling well. Because as I got older, or, her being a single mother of 3 living in Brooklyn, New York, she worked a lot. So sickle cell can be incredibly unpredictable. So the moments when, she wasn't around and something happened with me, my siblings always knew exactly what to do. But it also really forced me and encouraged me to grow up very quickly, because there were moments where I had to be strong enough to take care of myself, even if I was alone.
how did the other, not your siblings, but your classmates and that kind of stuff, how did they interact with you when you was growing up as a sickle cell person?
So growing up, my mother always made my teachers aware of my illness and the challenges that come with it, and also explain to them that there may be times just based upon my health that I may be out of school. So they were always willing to, send my homework home and things like that. But when it came to the other students, we kept it a secret. I think I was in the 3rd grade when I finally decided to share with my classmates the fact that I had sickle cell, and that was something that I was dealing with. There was a book that I had, and it was about a young Black girl who had sickle cell, and it kind of explained, what it is, what it feels like. So we used to have days in our 3rd grade class where you can bring in a book for the teacher to read to the whole class. So it was my turn, and I said to myself, I'm going to bring in this book, and I'm going to educate my classmates on what sickle cell is, and maybe this will also be my opportunity to share a little bit about what I'm dealing with, and the moments when I'm not in school, this is what's happening to me, or these are the reasons why. That was an interesting experience, and looking after that, I definitely regretted it, just because children are children, and they could be incredibly mean. So I guess the response that I received after sharing that day in class wasn't really well received. My classmates definitely made fun of me. They said I had cooties, or they thought that it was contagious. Like, oh, if you touch Habiba, you're going to get sickle cell. So, I mean, they were being children, but at the time that was heart-wrenching for me, because I wanted to be able to share what I was going through. But after that experience, I kind of went back to just being silent about it and really not being open with other young people about it outside of my family.
Oh, wow. That just breaks your heart to hear that.
Habiba, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am fine. Going back to, you said you had these open conversations with your mom. Did she know that she was a trait carrier? I mean, after the second child, like the first child, she would have gotten noticed. Did she know initially that she had the trait? Did your father know that he had the trait?
I don't believe that my parents realized that they were carriers until they had my brother. They weren't aware of it prior to them having their first child, which was my older brother. So once, of course, her second pregnancy came around, she was definitely aware, and I think they were aware of the risk. But I think like most families, or most Black families, they just kind of took it in stride. Even knowing the fact that she was a carrier, my father was a carrier, just there was a lot of hope and prayer in hoping that their children would come out either just being carriers rather than, having the disease. So I think it kind of threw everybody for a loop, but they weren't aware prior to my older brother.
When you said that the other kids were in the pool and they were doing other things, what sports were you allowed to participate in as you were growing up?
So growing up, I honestly was not allowed to really participate in any sports or any extracurricular activities, although I really wanted to. It was always made clear to me, from my mother and also my doctors that, it's not that they don't want me to experience some of these things, but the strain that it can have on my body could hurt me, or it could make my sickle cells flare up, and just the things that were associated with that. So the pain episodes, and knowing what those things felt like, it was kind of ingrained in me pretty early. Like, there are just certain things that you can't do. You have to be extra careful with what you do and how you manage your body. So I'm about 5'10", long arms, long legs. Usually when people see me, they're like, okay, you had to have played basketball or volleyball or ran track. And those are all interests of mine. But I'm the farthest thing from an athlete. I never really had the opportunity to participate in any of those things. So growing up, my brother, he played basketball, but I really gravitated towards the art. So growing up, I sang. I loved to sing. And I still do every now and again, but that was my outlet. Also art. What else did I participate in? Dancing which that in and of itself was kind of a fight. I really had to beg my mom for me to get into dancing, because she also thought that would, put a strain on my body. But I was able to kind of talk to her about the fact that, I would be extra careful. So the art, singing, dancing, I loved to draw and paint. I thought I was going to be a fashion designer when I was younger, because those are the things that I put myself into, just because I didn't have the opportunity to do some of the other things that were a little more physical.
The educators, when you're coming up through school, especially through elementary, middle school, high school would have been different because you're able to communicate for yourself a lot more. But how did the educators transition toward helping you
when you did miss school a lot?
They were receptive to the fact that, I had a pre-existing health issue that could take me out of class every now and again. So they were understanding when it came to that, giving my siblings my homework to bring home to me, or giving my mom the opportunity to kind of pick up my homework so I can stay on top of things. They were definitely understanding from that standpoint. I can't remember it being something that I, regularly or consistently discussed with my teachers, but I'll definitely say that they didn't have a strong understanding of what sickle cell was and how it could have effects on the body. I think it was more so, she's a sick child, and this is something that, she has to deal with. So they were accommodating, which I'm grateful for, because I never got held back a grade. I was able to keep up work-wise with my peers, and I'm grateful for that. And that's another thing about me. Even though I knew there were going to be times where, I'm in the hospital for a week or longer, or I have to stay home because I just physically don't feel good, I've always found a way to push myself to make sure that I am handling my responsibilities or handling the things that I know that I need to do. Because having control over some things in my life were incredibly important, because when it came to my health, I always felt like I had no control. I was at the mercy of my illness or of my body. So when it came to things like school or the extracurricular activities I was able to do, those things became very important to me.
Maybe a hypothetical. If I was a young person that just recently found out I had sickle cell, what advice or something would you give me if I told you the kids at school were teasing me? What kind of advice would you give me as far as how to deal with it and still be able to stay on point as far as and that kind of stuff?
I would tell them that, everybody is not for you. And I had to learn that the hard way. But that's one thing that I realized. Like, even though the majority of my classmates, they poked fun at me because they really didn't understand, or they were just being children, I still always had like 1, 2, or 3 people in my class who became my friends and didn't judge me based upon what I was dealing with. So I would say, everybody is not going to be for you. But you're always going to find, just a few people who will remain good friends to you, who will support you. One thing I've also realized is that although we want to be open and we want to be vulnerable with people, I've learned that we can't be vulnerable with everybody. We can't share our story with everybody because people won't value it, they won't understand it, and they might judge you for it. So if you're going to be open with people, try to make sure that they're people that you truly value and people that you trust, because everybody won't honor our vulnerability. When it comes to schoolwork and, staying on top of things, even though sometimes you don't feel like it, one thing I've learned when it comes to my education, it was a great distraction for me. It was a great way for me to focus on something other than the regular and consistent stress that we sometimes feel when it comes to our health. Either we're physically in pain, or we're dealing with the emotional toll that sickle cell can put on young people that I think we often don't talk about, like the depression or feeling alone, or feeling like nobody understands you, or feeling like you always have to hide a piece of yourself. I would say that try to transfer that energy into the things that bring you joy, like studying or like going to school, or like your education, or just some other things that that you might participate in, whether it's sports or the arts or something that just brings you joy, so you can move your mind from your health to things that'll make you happy, because that sense of energy it'll just be better for you to put into the things that mean something to you.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm definitely taking all that to heart, because we're doing these health fairs. We do have youngsters about the 4th or 5th grade coming up, and that's something that I can probably impart to them, some form to think about. So that's some good advice.
Excuse me, we need to take an identification break, and we'll be right back. Thank you for listening to The Cell. We broadcast on WGRN 94.1 FM every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. You can also stream us live on WGRN 94.1 FM. Welcome back, Ann.
I just want to jump in there real quick. Like Ernie said, we have these health fairs. Let's look at it from the reverse side. What is it that you would tell young people that do not have sickle so that they're not bullies?
I would say to them that they should try to have compassion and empathy. And I don't know if that's too much for people who are a little bit younger, because, those are skills that I feel you don't gain until you get to like later on in middle school or maybe even high school. But just have compassion. I know sometimes when people don't personally experience things for themselves, they don't always understand. But sometimes you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes to say, this is something that, my friend or my peer is going through. So I think sickle cell patients don't necessarily need pity. That's not what we want. We want to be motivated. We want to be encouraged. We want to be pushed just like any other young person or just any other person, period. So I think just genuinely being a listening ear, because sometimes we do just want to vent, even if we know that the other person that we're speaking with doesn't understand. We want a listening ear. We want somebody who's just going to be compassionate to what we're going through, even if they don't understand. And we want that same sense of push, a same sense of encouragement. That's one of the things that I think I struggled with the most growing up because of my health. If you read or Google sickle cell, I think people will sometimes take what they read as, well, whoever has this isn't strong enough, or they're not capable of doing certain things just based upon what their illness says. So I was never really pushed or motivated, and I love my parents and I'm grateful for them every day, but I've shared this with them as well. I wanted to be pushed the same way my siblings were pushed to try new things or to do different things. I know because of fear and because of really just wanting to keep me as healthy as possible, I didn't always get a strong sense of encouragement. It was always, no, you sick. You don't need to do that. We're grateful to have you. So just have a seat or find something else to do. Or, oh, you don't need to do that. You're not strong enough. That's not what we need to hear. We need to hear that we can do all things. And I had to figure out how to give myself that sense of encouragement. I had to be my own cheerleader in order to seek and do different things.
So this is a fast forward question. I mean, having, being a sickle cell survivor yourself and you're still young, so are you thinking about having a family for yourself to impart that, or you just already made a decision? So how's that going?
So I'm definitely hoping to have a family. That's something that I've always wanted, that I've always prayed for. So now that I'm at the age where I'm married and I feel like I'm ready, it's just something that I'm actively praying about and also working towards. But I was incredibly mindful even before getting married, even as I was dating, just of course being open and honest about my personal health challenges and having open discussions about, are you a sickle cell trait carrier, or even educating people on what that is and why I had to ask those questions in the process of dating. And luckily my husband is not a carrier, so I'm grateful for that. But that was another challenging piece of my journey is, that wasn't necessarily coaching that I received from, my physicians or the social workers that I worked with growing up, or even with, my family, just because, that's not something that they necessarily had to do. It was always conversations with me about, the fact that you have to be mindful about, who you fall in love with or who you choose to spend your life with, just because they're not just marrying you, but they're taking on a lot being with somebody who has sickle cell. So that weighed on me a lot growing up, and it also made the thought of dating, which is something that's natural for young people, it made it a little bit more challenging. It made me kind of anxious about it all, but it's something that I knew I had to do. So I was definitely open and honest when it came to sharing what I was dealing with, but also asking the necessary questions that all sickle cell patients definitely have to do, just thinking about the future.
Comment is, so when that comes, I'm buying for godmommy status.
Got it. I'll add you to the list.
I do have another question for you regarding education. I know that a lot of sickle cell patients are scared to go to school because of being sick so much. How did you prepare to go to college? I know some of them take classes online. Some of them are able to make it to school locally. I'm not for sure if you went to school out of state or what, but how did you prepare yourself to go to college?
So going to college was something I always wanted to do and something I knew I was going to do. It was a requirement in my mother's household. She said everybody's going to school and everybody's getting an education, and we also had to get scholarships. So that was a no-brainer. Knowing that I wanted to continue my education, that was always something I wanted to do. When it came to what school and how far, that was a bit of a challenge just because I didn't want to go far away from the physicians that I knew and that have been caring for me for years. It was also a comfort level for my mother, just wanting to know that, if anything happened, she could get to me quickly or I could quickly come home in the event that anything happened. So because of that, I decided to stay here in Columbus and go to Ohio State. Thankfully, because of how well I did academically in high school, I got a full scholarship to Ohio State, which made my decision all the more easier. So I was close to my doctors at OSU. I was close to my doctors at Children's. And the thing that made it all the more challenging preparing for school, I had my silent stroke at 17. So as not too long after I got my acceptance letter, I found out that I had a full scholarship to Ohio State, and I was preparing for this next phase in my life. That's when my stroke happened, and I had to begin my apheresis treatment on a monthly basis, which it really weighed on me emotionally and also mentally, just because I'm leaving my home, I'm leaving my family to, come to college, to take care of myself, and to step into adulthood. So to have to add a new treatment that I was still grappling with emotionally and mentally, but also trying to get used to what it does to my body physically was very challenging in the beginning, because I decided I wanted to live on campus. I wanted to be involved. So I was a very involved student, part of different clubs, leading different groups, things like that. But when it came to my classwork, most of my classes were in person. I maybe had a few that were online. I also had to get comfortable speaking to my teachers on my own, which was new for me because I could always rely on my mom to have those conversations in advance, but now it was on me. So going to my professors at the very first class to say, I have a pre-existing health issue. This is what happens sometimes. Some professors were, of course, receptive, but some professors, they were like, we're all adults. We don't care. So it was a balance. It was something I really had to learn. And I also had to force myself to do my own research in advance. What resources does the school provide for people like me who may have health issues or other things to support them along their journey? And that's also something that I had to learn how to do and do on my own, which was a bit challenging, trying to balance my schoolwork, living my life as a normal 18, 19-year-old, also taking myself to the hospital for treatment. At this point, I'm going to my doctor's appointments alone. So it was a lot in the beginning, really just trying to get adjusted to this stage in my life, which was adulthood. But to add the treatments on top, that made it hard. I always had to be mindful of my class schedule as well when I was scheduling it. So I always have treatments on Fridays. So I tried to make it a point to not have any classes on Friday, just so I can give myself that time to rest when I got back from treatment, take the weekend to rest, and that way I'm prepared to tackle my week and all the other stuff that I have to do. But balancing studying, sometimes when I wasn't feeling well, that was definitely a challenge for me, just because, you know, when you're in the middle of pain crisis, the last thing you want to look at is a book. All you want to do is lay in your bed. So that was hard. And I also worked. I had jobs on campus because there were bills that I had. You know, it was my phone bill and things that were small, but it was important for me to step into the next phase of my life and to start working and doing other things that my peers were doing, and not allowing my sickle cell to hold me back. Although it presented some challenges for me, I'm grateful for what those first few years were like, because it taught me to really take care of myself. And I'm grateful that my family gave me the room to do that, although it was hard. I know it was hard for my mom.
Excuse me, we're running out of time, so we're going to have to do a part 2. Annie and Ernie, I thank you both for being co-hosts of today's show. Habiba, could you please provide our listeners where they can get more information on your platform?
Absolutely. It's called Beyond the Cell. You can find it on Instagram. It's beyond_the_cell. You can also follow my personal page, which is @FutureFloated, and it's also linked there where I've been sharing my story. And as mentioned, I'm in the process of developing my full website where you can learn more about me, my story, the stories of other people in our community who've been impacted by sickle cell, and also a link to some resources across the community. My hope is to turn this platform into also a way to do some fundraising and also some action-oriented events, which will primarily be blood drives and encouraging the African-American community to really get more involved in sharing their blood with the community. So it's a baby that I'm still birthing, but there's so much more that I'm hoping to do. So it's Beyond the Cell.
Thank you. With that, everyone, thank you, and I thank our listeners tuning in. And with that, peace out.
The Faith Thomas Foundation would like to thank you for listening to The Cell. We broadcast on WGRN 94.1 FM every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. You can also stream us live on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. on WGRN.